So, if you haven't already done so, follow through with the links I have for you right here on top of this particular podcast, which is follow through to brackets.io and download whichever version of Brackets it is that the platform that you're on. So, if you're on a Mac, you'll download the .dmg, that's a disk image for Brackets, and install that. Please, again, don't worry about whether or not this is a vetted piece of software. It absolutely is. If you're on a Windows side, download the correct version, either the 32 or the 64-bit. For most browsers, for most clients, that's you guys, you're not going to have to worry about what version of Brackets it is you're downloading. When you visit the site, it's going to, it's called Q, it's going to ask your browser, hey, what operating system are you on? Your browser is going to reply, hey, I'm on a Mac, hey, I'm on a PC, and it's going to go ahead and download the correct or the proper version for you, so you won't have to worry about it. So if you haven't already installed Brackets, pause it here, go ahead and grab that, install it, and come on back. For those of you who have, let's continue right on, shall we? The first thing you're going to do when you load up Brackets for the very first time is make a couple of small changes. Now, these changes are not required, but I do suggest that these are things that, number one, people here in the industry are going to do to make their lives easier, and actually, number two, that people in the industry do to physically use the software a little bit better. When it is that you are looking at a PC for a very, very long time, these screens are awfully bright. When you're looking at a white background with a colored foreground, what that's going to do is essentially burn out your retina. I am not here to disable anybody. So the very first thing we're going to do after you open Brackets for the first time is let's just take a notice of a couple of things that's happening. First and foremost, you'll notice that the file menu along the top left-hand corner is exactly the same thing that you would expect to see on any other piece of software. We've got file, we've got edit, and then we've got the things that are specific to our particular software, in this case, Brackets. Immediately, you're also going to notice that we do have some code there in the window. We'll get into that in the next couple of podcasts, which are starting out with coding and getting to know the PDF document. So the very first thing we want to do is under the view grouping, the first thing we want to do is change themes. This is what is known as the light theme. It's the default. What we want to do is change that to dark. What that's going to do is help us stare at this for large periods of time by taking the background color from white and turning it to dark. It is not black like you'll see before you hit done. It's actually going to be a dark gray with a little bit of blue. What that's actually chosen on purpose so as to filter out the blue light that essentially assaults your eye sockets and kills them over time. If you prefer a larger font, you can change that here. The default is 12 pixels. That's kind of the sweet spot for most users, but absolutely positively you can change that. You could change the font family as well if you were so inclined, but I do not suggest having to do so. What you'll notice now is that we have a nice, pleasant, grayish with blue removed background, and that the code that we have there, the sample code that Brackets included with your download, still has nice colors so that we can see the difference between things. We'll get into that again in the subsequent podcast here. The very, very next thing we want to do is under the view grouping again. You'll notice the third and fourth options there are vertical and horizontal split. What that's going to do is give you essentially two windows with which to work. My personal preference, and again, this is not anything you are required to do, but this is just how I work, so I'm just filling you into my workflow a little bit here. My preference is the vertical split. What this is going to allow me to do is in the left-hand pane work with, in this case, is going to be the index.html, and in the right-hand pane, it's going to allow me to work with another file. So if I have a series of HTML documents open, I can use one in the left-hand pane and one in the right so that I can see more, or more probably what I would have is in the left the HTML document and in the right the CSS. Again, those pieces of lingo are going to follow in subsequent podcasts, so that I can see everything that I need to see all at once without having to bounce back and forth between things. So this is essentially doubling the amount of work that you can do on a single screen, which is always, always fantastic when you're working with developing in any code environment whatsoever. The very last thing I'm going to highlight here in the working with brackets podcast is you will notice on the far right hand side, so we've got the usual minimize, maximize, and close buttons in the upper right hand corner, and immediately there under we have a little lightning bolt. That lightning bolt is the live preview. If and only if you have Google Chrome installed, and again I suggest, and it's only a suggestion, I cannot mandate for you to do this. If you have installed Chrome, what this is going to allow you to do is open up a new instance of Chrome almost immediately. And that instance of Chrome is going to show you what you are working with in one of your navigatable panes that you see the left or the right hand column here. That's going to really cut down on the amount of time it takes you to do something like this. Now, this is actually the work through that you'll see in the XHTML document, and this is something that we can skip if we use this live preview. Rather than having to go through every time I want to check and see how my progress is coming, I would have to save the CSS, I would have to save the HTML, I would have to minimize brackets, I would have to open Firefox or Chrome or, heaven forbid, Internet Explorer, and I would have to go through and actually open my file. I'm not saying that takes a ton of time, but as you go back and forth and you're checking, it's really going to take a lot of time to do that when you add them all together. So that's going to help minimize the amount of frustration. That's going to help minimize the amount of time it is you're navigating away from the developing environment that you're working in. And over the course of a day, over the course of the following week, it's really going to pay dividends. So really the three things you want to do immediately as you open brackets for the first time is, and again, these are only suggestions. Number one is to change the default theme from light to dark. Number two would be to either give yourself a vertical or a horizontal split so that you can see more code as we're going on through here. And number three would be, if you haven't already done so, install Chrome. It's really a fantastic piece of software. Is install Chrome and have that live preview. Now, the only other thing of merit before we get started is, if you look all the way over on the left hand side one more time, what you'll notice is we have that far left pane. In that, all of the files you're going to need as we start to open them and play with more files, you're actually going to see those over there on that far left hand side. What that's going to do is, again, reduce the amount of time it is that you take going back and forth, bouncing between different files, closing one file, opening another, editing that file, closing that file, go to the first one, edit that. It doesn't sound like that's going to take up a lot of time, but in practice it really does. As we build our very first web page in the next podcast, we're going to have more than one file over there on the left hand side, and that's really going to be a way to save yourself some time. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. So that's our simple brackets overview. In our next podcast, let's look into how do we make our very first HTML page.